Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Attorney Devin Shanley, and I am with Peterson, Burke, and Cross. Welcome to another edition of Lunch with a Lawyer. Today, we're going to be talking about an area of law that is near and dear to my heart, nonprofit organizations, specifically something called a public charity. We'll talk about what that is versus something more considered a private foundation. What are going to be the parts of seeing one thrive, and really just kind of what's very unique about these sorts of organizations. An area of my practice that I really deeply enjoy is helping people get started up, talking through some of the legal issues that can come up for nonprofits, and doing just a little bit of talking through strategies on how they can grow what they do and be even more effective about what they are. So we'll talk about what those entities are, what makes them unique, and how you, as sitting as a board member that was probably roped in somewhat against your will at one point or another, can do to help this cause that you love near and dear. There's going to be our normal disclaimers that we have as we talk about this. Obviously, I am based out of the great state of Wisconsin. Our practice is based out of Wisconsin, so the majority of the law that we're going to be talking about is going to be Wisconsin law. There might be just a smidge of federal law this time, but for the most part, just assume Wisconsin state law. If you are not in the state of Wisconsin, hi! It's great that you're joining us for lunch today, and I hope that you listen and enjoy. But if you've got questions about how to start a charity or some of the specifics for your state, please contact an attorney in your state. I'd start with your state bar. They're a great place to get referrals. If you're in the state of Wisconsin, hi! Thank you for joining us for lunch today. It's great to have you with us. And please listen, ask questions. If you do ask questions, these always work best when we have questions. If you do have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. But the one thing is, if it's specifics, I will probably, I reserve the right, and I'll probably say you should contact us just to get a little bit more information and talk through this in a more confidential manner. I do this partially because you don't need to broadcast your personal facts, although I think that's ironic to say actually on Facebook, because I think that's where people post most of their personal facts just without thinking. But more important, I don't want to try and form an attorney-client relationship, and if I get too many facts and give an opinion, that might form, and that's probably not best until we can sift out conflict checks and see if that sort of legal representation and that sort of relationship is going to be best. So if you are thinking about forming that, if you want to try and pick my brain or any of the other attorneys here at Peterson, Burke & Cross, please call us. We would love that. 920-831-0300. We specialize in you. So give us a call, and we would love to talk with you further and schedule that initial consultation. Lunch today for me is going to be parts. So I will probably just show you the main part, and I got to adjust a couple things, so your patience is appreciated. It is Restaurant Week here in Green Bay, Wisconsin. So today we're going to have lunch brought to us by the English Inn, probably one of the most romantic places in Green Bay to take a date. So if you've got that special someone and you want to impress them, remember it is Restaurant Week and it is time to shine. Take them to the English Inn. There are lots of great specials. I have, and this is like a 3-course meal today, guys. I've got a bowl of, or a cup of chili. I have a French dip, and I have the au jus sauce over here. That's what I had to move. And a cookie. And my paralegal is telling me that she got strawberry shortcake that she's very excited about. So even if you're thinking lunch and you want to do a nice lunch date, sneak out while the kids are in school, awesome. Go to the English Inn. There are some great lunch specials, and of course, there's always a great dinner menu, especially this week during Restaurant Week. If you guys have something that you want to share or brag about, please do. I always love hearing and seeing what you guys have for lunch. I especially love when people are like, I'm having a cold sandwich and I'm eating a much better sandwich. But it's always great to share that and continue that. These events to me are always times where it's a chance for us to sit down and talk and get a chance to really share what's going on, both in the legal community and just in what's going on with you. So please feel free to add some comments. Charities. A lot of times I get calls when we get into this and people go, I need that C3, that 501(c)(3) thing, whatever. I go, 501(c)(3), and they go, yeah, sure, that. Um, and a lot of times what this is people who really, really have a dream, they want to build something, and they want to do it the right way. This is awesome. That is a very good thing. Specifically, when we talk about charities, there's a whole myriad of different types of organizations that can all fit under this big umbrella of the term charity. So we're going to want to be exact about what exactly kind of charity we're talking about. The first major divide is going to be something called a public charity versus a private foundation. A private foundation is one where it's still tax exempt, it's still a 501(c)(3), but it's set up in such a way where there aren't as many donors. There's typically fewer donors that are pumping in cash to fund the charitable ventures of this entity. More common, especially if you're going to be a mom and pop charity just kind of starting up to do something right, and what most people are thinking of is something called a public charity. A public charity is one where there is no real owner to the organization. There is no real central donor. They get most of their assets through the wider community or the activities they do inside of their charitable purpose. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but keep that word in your head. Charitable purpose. And so most of their funding comes from either donations or grants or income received from their charitable purpose, the good activities that they do, or memberships to the organization, and they kind of gather it all together and have it move forward. That is considered public charity. I think the key word to keep in mind here is public. Whenever we have these sorts of charities, and one of the quirks about these organizations is that it is very much of a public style organization. It's not really owned by anybody. It's there for the benefit of the community as a whole. It's still a somewhat private entity insofar as it's its own entity. It's not related to the government, although it may get government funds. It's going to have flavors of a private business to it, but it's not really owned by anybody, and it's there primarily for the community's benefit. This makes it a very interesting sort of organization to do good work with. These things can take on many, many different forms. They can be very, very tiny. They can be absolutely huge. And it provides a lot of flexibility to allow you to really try and serve those around you and just do good. They're very, very interesting organizations. What are they made up of? Well, in the previews of this, we're going to be talking about how the legalities that were formed. This is the stuff that normally drive people into my office and sit down and talk with me. We'll be talking about the business plan of it, the stuff that most people think that they're going to be able to put together, and some are really good at it and some aren't, and what's going to make a successful one versus a not a successful one. And we're going to talk about the leadership. Who are the people that really make this up? What are their jobs? What do they have to do, and what sort of duties do they have to the organization itself? As we cover those three basic concepts, we'll find that there's a lot of information for each one. Again, if you have questions on this, please ask. If you have further questions, go ahead and put it into the comments section. I'll try and follow up, or give me a call, and we'll be happy to talk about that as well. First and foremost, the legalities. How exactly do we start this? Starting this sort of organization is not going to be radically different from starting up any business in the state of Wisconsin. You're going to be looking at what sort of legal entity you're going to form. You can use a lot of different legal entities. The best practice is going to be using what's called a non-stock corporation. I'll be talking more about that next week when we talk about actually the steps needed to start a charity. But for the most part, in this week and today, just know I'll be using primarily corporate law terms and assuming that the charity is a non-stock corporation. It doesn't have to be. It could be an LLC. It could be some sort of unorganized entity, uh, especially when I see like older churches. That tends to be what it is. Um, but for the most part today, we're going to assume an actual corporate entity and stick by those. So if you're going to be talking about a corporate entity, the first way you get it to exist is by filing something called the Articles of Incorporation. In the state of Wisconsin, you file that with the Department of Financial Institutions, and every year you file an annual report. That's simple. After that, you form something called bylaws. Bylaws are going to be the rules on how the organization is run. Well, how many meetings do you have? How many how many people sit on the board of directors? What sort of officers on there? What do the officers do? Do you have staff members? Who monitors the staff members? What's some of that organizational flow chart? Some of it's going to be pure legal boilerplate, and it's going to be a lot of rules and things that people like me care about until there are problems, and then everybody cares about, and they call up the lawyer and say, "What do we do? What do we do? I have this board member that's a problem. How do I get rid of him?" Or the board's not listening to me and they're not having meetings. What do I do to call it? I want to do this. I don't like that guy. They're making these decisions and I don't feel right about it. A lot of times the first step we do is we go back to the bylaws and we kind of review, what does it say? What are the procedures? Are there procedures? Are there not? Do we have to go back to the statutes? Things like that. Let me stop for a second and explain what I mean by go back to the statutes. When you have a set of bylaws, and they don't cover something in particular, then you have to go back to the Wisconsin statutes under the corporate laws to look to see if there's a specific statute that governs that. That's going to give you your rules to kind of fill in any particular situation. Therefore, if you're sitting on a board, one of the first things that's going to be good is A, knowing what the bylaws say, B, looking at what they don't say. And if you really, really have time, go back through the statute to see if there's something that they say about that. And the last part is, don't be afraid to say, let's review this and maybe try and fill in some of those gaps. I think a very common thing that a lot of people are experiencing now, if you have a really old set of bylaws, they might not have thought through the idea of Zoom meetings or people just agreeing to stuff through email or calling on the telephone. They might require all the meetings to be in person. That may not be a great idea right now as we live in our land of COVID or pandemics or diseases or just distance and the internet. So maybe doing a little bit of a refresh is not a bad plan, if only for that, if not a few other things as well. You're also going to need to get charitable status. Charitable status, and what I mean by that, is getting that 501c3 after your name with the IRS. There are two forms for that. One is called the 1023 and the other is called the 1023EZ. If possible, you want to do the 1023EZ. We'll talk about those forms in a lot more detail next week again. But that's that process. But you're not done. And again, we'll go through this again next week, but you'll also need to get status with the state that you're in, so the state of Wisconsin or any other state that you're doing a lot of business or particularly soliciting a lot of donations. You're going to want to look to see what the Secretary of State or the Department of Financial Institutions in each one of those states are going to be doing. It might be a different name depending upon the state. Wisconsin is a little unique with the whole concept of the Department of Financial Institutions. A lot of times it's something called the Secretary of State. Talk to a local attorney to find out, and you can go from there. But realize there's going to be a state component to this as well, with possible annual filings from the state as to that effect as well. You'll also want to look at other legalities, other licenses you'll have. A great example in the state of Wisconsin that is very common is going to be the concept of raffle licenses. I cannot tell you how many times I've sat down with people and we go over this, and they're used to, when you go to a charity's fundraiser, there's gambling everywhere. There's paddle wheels, and there's casino nights, and there's raffles, and they're just used to walking in and gambling, not quite like you're in a casino, but something akin to that, and everybody being cool with that because it's okay, all the money goes to charity. It's not okay. That's still technically against the law, although charities do have specific forms of gaming activities that they can legally do, primarily raffles, and you got to apply for licenses for that. In Wisconsin, there are two types of licenses for raffles. They're not overly hard. Um, if you're sitting on a board and you're doing fundraising in any one of those, be mindful of that. If you have questions about what the licensure on any of that sort of stuff or how to obtain it, you can contact your office or contact an attorney local to you that practices with nonprofits. Um, it's not a difficult process, just get it done. Leadership. When we talk about who leads a charity, there's going to be a couple different pieces to this. What you have to understand first and foremost is a little bit of what I talked about before when I talked about this is owned by the community at large. And the other part is I'm assuming that we're talking about a corporation. Those two things become very, very important. One of the little pieces that I'll talk a little bit more about next week is something called an inured benefit. Essentially, when there is, people think that when you have a nonprofit, you're running this and you got to run at a loss. There can't be money left over. You can't just keep money around. That's not totally true. The big thing is you can't take money from that public entity, that charitable entity, and move that to a private individual. In a business, if I run my business and hopefully at the end of the day I make a profit, so then what I do is I take that profit and I put it into my back pocket because I started the business. That's capitalism. Now, there might be a lot of different regulations about how I do that and how I manage between partners and how I track that for the IRS for income purposes and how that gets and how that's taxed to me. But at the end of the day, as just a basic function to think through for this is I run business, I make money, money goes in my pocket. And that's why I make the business. That's a private business. The business goes to the owners, the stockholders. That's where you talk about dividends and things like that. That's how that goes. With a nonprofit, there is no private owner. Nobody owns it. It's kind of there for the community. That's very important when we talk about leadership because when you have if you have a 401k or if you have a mutual fund, every so often you'll get these things and they talk about proxy statements and all this. And basically what the idea is the shareholders elect people to run the corporation called directors, the board of directors. And you elect these people and they look out for the corporation that makes you more money, and that's how that goes. You still have the same basic structure of a board of directors in this, but the question is, who votes them in? Because there are no owners. Well, it depends upon the structure of the organization. If something is based upon members, then probably the members, whoever they are. Or it could be just the previous board of directors, some sort of self-fulfilling board that is constantly put together by itself in staggering forms because nobody owns it. In this case, the board of directors essentially are the people who make the major decisions for the organization. A director in this case is the term that I would use, is going to have three basic duties to the organization when they sit on that board. The first is a duty of care. They have to make sure that they're making the right decisions for the life of the organization. They have to keep it going. They got to keep it moving. They got to make sure that it's doing what it should be doing. They got to make sure that their investments are good, that their business deals are beneficial to the organization. Things like this. Sound business practices are going to be key in these sorts of situations. The second is going to be a duty of loyalty. The duty of loyalty means you're putting the organization primarily ahead of yourself. If you know of a business deal and it's going to primarily benefit the organization, but instead you don't tell the organization about it and you just snake it away from them, that's a violation of the duty of loyalty. You need to make sure that you're putting the priorities of the organization if not first, very, very high. The third is a duty of obedience, meaning if there's a decision by the board, you're kind of going to go about that together. Even if you're going to, uh, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, if that's where the board is going, you're going to try and have that be the decision and really try and bring that about as well. That is going to be the setup of the directors. Inside of the bylaws, you'll have a set of years for the term for the directors. Could be 5, could be 1, could be 3, something. A lot of times I see it as 2, but those directorships kind of turn over. A lot of times directors aren't paid in these sorts of organizations, particularly smaller ones, although if it's a really, 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 really popular board, it might be. If you do pay your directors, you're going to have some interesting questions to the IRS as you fill out your annual reports to the IRS, particularly something called the 990. But if you're going to start to get into that, talk to an attorney before you start paying your board. There's also something called elected officers. The elected officers tend to be out of the board of directors. They tend to be the executive types that really help steer the board. So when you hear people talk about, I'm the president of so-and-so organization, probably what they are is the president of the board, which means they're going to have some sort of executive authority to manage the organization and manage the board itself. Somebody's got to make the agenda and run the meeting. Someone has to make sure that the money is going well. Someone has to sit there and take notes. This is the secretary position. I swear it's the last one that's always filled. Somebody's going to be some sort of VP. They're going to be people with some sort of leadership position on the board that's going to be guiding the board itself. The bylaws is going to be the main key where you're going to figure out what do all these people do. Also, if someone asks you to sit on a board, the first thing I would advise anybody to do is look at the bylaws. Look what you're committing to. And if someone asks you to take an executive position, you look at that and make sure you see what exactly they're going to expect to do, because the person who's asking you to do that might not actually know. Bylaws and all of these sorts of corporate documents tend to be forgotten and tend to be lost. So reading that, knowing what you're signing up for is going to be critical. The last part when we talk about leadership is going to be your staff. The staff can be some sort of professional people who work for them. If that's the case, you're probably going to be dealing with something called an executive director. What is the executive director versus the board or versus the president of the board? That's going to depend upon each organization. Again, go back to your bylaws to look very particular, but as a whole, in a general sense, the staff, the executive director is going to be the people who run the day-to-day parts of the organization, and the board look after the big picture items. If it's working really well, they work hand in hand and they form a symbiotic relationship. The executive director and that really help form the long-range process of the board. They recruit potential board members, and the board provides the supervision and support to make sure that the day-to-day staff is staying on purpose and on mission and within the guidance of the organization as a whole. If there are problems, then you're probably going to have some sort of power struggle between the professional staff who are there going day to day and the board that might show up once a month or less to kind of boss them around, and that could be a problem. So whenever you're walking into an organization, if there is a staff, you're going to want to have an understanding of what that dynamic is between staff and the board of directors. The last is going to be the business plan. This is going to be one of those pet peeves of mine. I could probably spend a lunch with a lawyer just on this. And that is when you talk about how exactly is the organization going to make money, how is it going to do what it's going to do, how is it going to be an effective organization over a long course of time. When we talk about these sorts of things, it starts with something called charitable purpose. I asked you to remember that early on. I nearly went into it when I talked about the concept of the board and what the board kind of looks out for. I definitely talked about it when I talked about what these organizations is. What is a charitable purpose? In one sense, I could say it's your mission statement or your vision. In reality, it's something more, it's something deeper than that. It's something where it should go into the very DNA, into the very soul of the organization itself. Uh, the simplest way I can explain it is just answering what exactly you do. We're an organization that we're a homeless shelter. Well, we provide housing and support for people who are homeless, or we're a book drive. We collect books and maintain literacy for the greater Green Bay area, or we're a youth football league. We teach leadership and life skills primarily through football and academic endeavors for young boys and girls ages 8 to 12, something along those lines. And it can be a very simple statement, but it's also going to be very profound. It's going to go into what sort of educational activity, what sort of sporting activity, what sort of charitable activity, and there are specific charitable activities outlined in Internal Revenue Code 501c3 that talk about what has been deemed charitable. Typically, you're talking about education, religious activities, or things that help out the general community. There are specific lists, and you'll want to get to that. But more than just saying, well, it's going to be charitable for this, you can put in general language for that. You're really going to want to drill down and hammer out specifically what exactly you do. We support veterans. Great. We support kids. Awesome. We support people who are impoverished. Amazing. We support teachers. We support enter in population that you want to do. What good work are you trying to do? The reason why I say that that's going to be much more than a few boxes that you check on forms. It's something that you're going to want to really integrate into the very core of what you do and what you are, is because charities are going to be fundamentally different from businesses. A business still needs that mission, still needs that drive. If you listen to any great business organization that's talking about how do you sell, or how do you do this, or how do you do that, how do you form businesses that are going to be successful. Why is Apple so great? Because Steve Jobs took it down to the core and said, we're about innovation, and drove that and had everything flow through that. And that's true. With a charity, it's even more than that. You see, a business is going to have widgets. At the end of the day, they're going to have something that they're selling that's going to create a profit. A burger joint sells burgers. Kohl's sells clothes. Disneyland sells an experience. They sell joy or fun. Every business is going to define that a little bit different. But at the end of the day, they're all selling something. And they hammer that home. And they get to what they're doing. But at the end of the day, it's about a service or a product that they're manufacturing. A charity is not that. It's not necessarily something designed to lose money. That's what a lot of people think. That's not right. But it's centered around a concept. And as a result, you're not selling a widget. You're not selling a service. You're not selling a product. What you're doing is you're offering a service to the community. And that's going to be important, because then you're going to need to create a stream of revenue. And why do you go out and suffer and get the 501c3 status and follow all of the rules and follow the 990? It's not so you don't pay taxes. It's so you can go out to people in the community and say, you should give us money because we do this. And it comes back to your charitable purpose. You're going to sell your charitable purpose and say, this is why it's valuable in the community. This is why we should support this. This is why you should give us money. And the more you're going to be able to drill down and understand that charitable purpose, the more you're going to be able to push that charitable purpose into everything you do, from your legal documents to the selection of your leaders, to the business plan that you do, to the services that you offer, everything. The more you're able to push that, know that, live that, the more you're going to be able to walk into somebody's home and say, you should give money to me and to this organization because at the end of the day, that's going to be the main thing that's going to separate that from a business. A lot of times when I get into these sorts of fundraising times and I talk to people about this, they think, if we just sell enough of these pizzas or candles or popcorn, or we do enough shoe drives or fun runs or all of these sorts of things, if we just do enough of that, we'll sell enough and make all this money. It's going to be great. And that's not necessarily the way to set up a successful charity, because it's going to come back to, well, how does this relate to what we do? The more you relate it back to what you do, the better you're going to be good at what you do, the more passionate you're going to be, the more you're going to find volunteers, and the more you're going to find people who believe in it. Because when you believe in it, you get other people to believe in it. And when you get other people to believe in it, and they believe it's valuable, they'll figure out a way, typically, to help you and support you. And it all comes back to that charitable purpose. The charitable purpose is what drives it forward. There's also a legal purpose to this. In the charitable purpose, there is something called the unrelated business income tax. Basically, it's this. You can go out and charge for your services. You can charge market rate for your services as a charity. That's fine, as long as it goes back to your charitable purpose. For example, you have a church. You have a church, and the church has got a big hall. Can the church rent that out for events? Yeah, they can. Can the church do that for weddings? Yes, they can. That makes sense inside of their charitable purpose. Can they throw quinceañeras? I don't know, maybe. I guess it depends upon the church. And we can take steps out until we get to a point where you go, well, at the end of the day, a church isn't an event hall. It may have an event hall. There may be events that are related to their purpose of forwarding the gospel or their religious beliefs or what they do in the community. But there's going to be a point where that moves beyond just that charitable purpose. And again, we could bring this up in many different types of organizations. You might be able to have other business ventures that tie into that charitable purpose. Can you do them? Yeah, that's great. Can you make money on it? Yeah, that's great. If the church starts coming in and they've got a really great member who's great at art design, and they design a hat, a clothing line, can they sell those clothing? Well, I guess, but that's going to start to get tricky, because a church isn't Shopko. It's not a clothing store. But depending upon what you're doing and how you classify it, that will become it. And the way you work around that is by understanding your charitable purpose. The more it fits within the charitable purpose, what you do, what's your mission, what exactly why are you benefiting the community at large? And if it fits within that, then it'll be fine. If it's outside of that, then that's going to be problematic. That's going to be even more as you start talking about partnering with for-profit entities. I have a business that I want to work with, and we're going to work together. Can I do that? Yeah, as long as it fits within your charitable purpose. And if it doesn't, what benefit are you getting out of it? How does this go back to your charitable purpose? How are you forwarding this? That becomes a very singular part of that. After you understand that and you integrate that charitable purpose in, then you're going to be able to run this a lot like a business. There's going to be certain administrative efficiencies. You're going to want to make sure your costs are right. You're going to want to make sure that you negotiate good contracts, that your expenses are matching your income, that you're going to have that. And the last part is, when you're thinking about income, don't think through just about the services. Make sure that you have some form of structural giving plan, or as I call it, professional begging. You're going to want to make sure that you use the luxury of being able to walk in and say, hey, this is good and you should just give us money. The more that you have that, the more you feel liberated to do that, and not just, can you donate a few products for this event? Really just walking in and developing a donor list, managing that donor list, and realizing that's as much of a core asset as anything else that you have, and making sure that your donors are connected to your charitable purpose, making sure that your donors are energized by what you do. And that might include fun runs. That might include big fancy events. But then you're going to realize what that event is for. It's for your charitable purpose, it's for raising awareness, it's for gathering donors. It's not necessarily just to get some money. That charitable purpose drives it. That's what drives in donors, that's what drives your services, that's what drives in your dollars, that's what drives your volunteers, that's what drives your expenses. That's what drives the whole organization. It makes it all go. Now, thank you if you watched this long. I don't normally go over, but I tend to ramble when I get into this because I love this area of law. Next week, we'll be talking about the 7 steps needed to get one off the ground. It can be very easy to start a charity. You'll probably hear me talk about charitable purpose again. If this has sparked something, you're thinking about that, you've been dreaming about doing something right for the community, and how do I get that started? Please feel free to give me a call, 920-831-0300. We'll do a free consultation. Thank you again to the English Inn. Think about them this weekend. It is Restaurant Week, so if you're watching this live, if you're watching this during this week, it's September 17th, keep them in mind. Keep some of the other local restaurants here in Green Bay in mind as well, because it's a great time to get out and really support them, not just because of the pandemic, but because it's Restaurant Week. We have Restaurant Week every year. And thank you for joining us, because at Peterson Burger Cross, we specialize in you.